Well, welcome back to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Rotary rebuild at just 20,000 miles from my 97 FD RX-7. Now, the reason, if you're not familiar with the series, the reason we're doing this is because I've had coolant problems for the past couple of months. I did all the diagnostics I possibly could leading up to what we think is now just a bad coolant seal or a cracked iron inside of one of the housings that is around the coolant jacket, causing the failure. Now, this video is what we've been leading up to. This is the actual teardown. I am going to be opening up the housings. I'm going to be opening up, taking a look at the rotors, pulling all of the pieces out, and trying to figure out what went wrong in person. Because up until this point, it's just been theory. Now, I am doing all of this with zero real-world rotary experience. I have all of the research in my brain, but when it comes to actually tangible, hands-on experience, this is a very first for me. And I've recorded every single nut and bolt of the entire process of pulling out this engine from my FD to getting it on the engine stand to tearing down all the auxiliary items and cracking it open. So if you're in kind of a similar position and you own a rotary, something's going wrong with it, you're fearing the inevitable rebuild, I'm hoping that my first time experience will answer some of the questions that you have and give you a better idea of how you can possibly do it yourself, because honestly, this hasn't been that hard yet, knock on wood. It's just nuts and bolts. You just follow step by step and you can get there. I'm actually following a 10-plus-year-old forum post from a gentleman who documented using pictures, it's not video, but pictures of every nut and bolt of him pulling the motor out of his car and then breaking it down on the engine stand. And then, unfortunately, during his process of figuring out what went wrong, I think he might have shipped overseas, so he never actually got to rebuild it. So getting it down to this episode, at the end of this episode, I will kind of be quote-unquote on my own. I'm not following like a step-by-step guide. So getting off my lower intake manifold, I revealed a literal rat's nest. Now, I mean, it's signs that mice were here at some point. All of these nuts that they cracked open and ate through, and there's like piss and stains all over the rotor housings. It's really gross. So I had to shop vac all that, use a screwdriver to like pry out all the caked on piss. It was nasty. So once all this stuff is like taken apart and I analyze everything and take all my photos and do everything I want to do, I'm going to be looking into painting it. I'm sure, you know, I can use a wire wheel and like get all that junk off, but I think just giving it just a fresh coat of like high temp enamel, like engine enamel, I think will look really good. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you can see what my car looks like. It has a Mazda Speed A-Spec kit. It's an original black paint, and I did air suspension with a custom leather duffel bag in the trunk for the air tank. And that leather, I'm a leather crafter, so I got to really kind of go hands-on with that. The leather and the seats match, so it's kind of like a vintage English tan looking full grain leather setup. So I'm thinking of trying to match, not that you'll really see this very much in the engine bay, but when you do, I think I'm going to try to match the rotor housings paint color to the leather theme for the interior and the bag setup for the car. So it's kind of just a side thought while I was looking at that mouse house setup on top of the irons there. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Yeah, so I filmed every nut and bolt, so not only will this hopefully help you guys if you're interested in doing this yourself, but it's also going to be a great reference for me when I go back to put everything together. I have literally a perfect documentation of everything I did in chronological order. I'll just watch it in reverse and I'll know exactly what I'm doing there. The only thing I did not film was there was like basically 2 or 3 very small kind of things. I was not able to film getting off the starter from underneath the car. I was not able to film some of the down pulp hardware and some of the bell housing that connects to the back of the engine, just because my camera, number one, would not fit under my car. I was not working on a lift. I just was jack stands in my driveway. My car doesn't even sit in my garage. My garage is my business. So the car is outside of my driveway on jack stands, and there was not a lot of room. So it was really just not a great experience for me, and trying to get that filmed wasn't fun. I did switch over to some point of view, my Meta smart glasses, to film some of it. I haven't really looked at the footage yet, but if I do start to edit that, you'll see that as like a shorts or like something on my TikTok or on my Instagram Reels or something like that. Anyway, back to what we're doing here. I'm really getting close. For this video, there was not a lot left on the engine. The lower intake manifold and the fuel rails, or some of the fuel system was still on there. Spark plugs I'm getting out. They don't look terrible. They're not amazing. I think these were done maybe a year ago. So 3,000 miles on these spark plugs. I would have, kind of gotten to changing them pretty soon if this wasn't the project that I had to go through. This journey was a little bit sooner than I was hoping that I would need to do it, if that makes sense. So getting those guys out, getting knock sensors out of the way were kind of like some of the last steps. And once I cracked this thing open, it was actually just purely fascinating to me. I had never seen rotors in person, like exposed rotors in person. So it was really fun to take these guys out. I've watched a ton of videos like Rad Potential, who is like a master like rotary YouTuber who like teaches you everything. So I watched a lot of his videos about, taking them out, making sure that things are accounted for and noted. And I was able to organize it that way, which is really awesome. And getting up to this point, it was all smooth sailing. Getting this flywheel, the clutch, pressure plate, and flywheel out of place was a little tricky. The pressure plate itself kind of got stuck. The clutch disc started to slip out. The clutch I don't think looks terrible. I don't really have experience with the physical clutch in my hand, seeing the wear. I don't know if it's something I'll replace. I mean, we're here, we might as well. It's going to come down to budget when it comes time to actually put things back together, but there it is. As far as I know, that is a stock or OEM clutch. Now, when it comes to getting this, some of these things off, you have to secure the flywheel in place. And I ordered a bracket from Amazon that's just like a flywheel, I don't even know what you would call it, but it keeps the flywheel from moving, and it locks into some of the factory housing bolts, and the teeth line up with the teeth on the flywheel. So that was really good in order to get that front bolt off, which you'll see in just a little bit. This faceplate is really like one of the final things before I tilt the engine on its face so that the rear of the engine's sticking up, and that way I can start working on the flywheel nut. I did order, for the flywheel nut, it's a 54 millimeter nut, so I had to order a 54 millimeter socket, because who the hell has that in their toolbox? So I got that from Amazon as well, but it was a 3/4 inch. I thought it was a 1/2 inch. So I had to go to Harbor Freight, pick up a 3/4 inch adapter, and it's just those little things that like really just add up on your budget. I just didn't, it's $8 here, $10 there. You're like, oh, $12 is nothing, $20 is nothing, $7, nothing, but then it just adds up and up and up. So if you're doing this yourself and you order this, make sure you take into account the adapters you need, the sockets you need. Otherwise, you're kind of just like back and forth ping-ponging back to the store. At this point, I just decided to like speed things up here. The oil pan itself has 18, if I remember correctly, 18 bolts that are all the same. So I had to, pop those off, and instead of filming every single one like individually, which I've been doing up until this point, just to get like a really clean, crisp, almost cinematic shot, sped that up. 18 bolts all the way around, just follow it. I also had to remove the motor mount bolts, which I haven't said this before, but if you haven't noticed, everything that I'm taking off that I can put the bolt back in its proper position or the nut back in its proper stud, I'm doing that so that it eliminates the amount of bagging and labeling that I have to do, and the amount of like, oh shit, what do I do with that bolt? So everything is back in its original spot. So when I took the motor mounts off, I actually put the motor mount bolts back through their threaded holes, which actually go through the oil pan. So I had to take those off and bag them. So there's just one extra bag that I had to do. So if you're doing this yourself and you do have to do that, make sure you have Ziploc bags and a Sharpie on hand. Write down on the Ziploc bag, you should get one that has like a little label thing on the front where, you write your contents of the bag. Write down what the bolt is, how many bolts are in the bag, what size the bolts are. If there's washers, write down the washers. If there's like lock washers, flat washers, whatever, banjo bolt, whatever it is, write it on there. And I actually wrote down, because I'm filming, the date that I took them off, because God knows how long an engine rebuild is going to take. So that way I can also reference the day that I filmed. I can look up that day's footage and see where it came from and what it looked like. So obviously you might not be filming, but that's just what I'm doing for my mental sanity. Some bolts are longer than others, so if I look at the bag and I'm like, crap, there's two different sizes, I can reference the footage and see where the long bolt or the short bolt came out of. Hope that makes sense. So here we are. At this point, we're actually cracking things open. We've got the front face off. You can see the, I guess you can call it the timing chain and sprocket. You can see the beautiful mechanisms that make this thing work. And when I took this off, I was like, I did not clean this, by the way. This is just clean as it was. Beautiful looking just mechanism. It has this, I've never seen this before, but it has a flat washer on this like sprocket that you have to actually hammer or chisel flat. It's like they bent a flat washer upward to lock it in. I had never seen that before. I've seen like cotter pins that kind of, I think, do the same job, but it was interesting that that's what they did. So I had, luckily, just the screwdriver worked perfectly with a hammer and just knocked that flat, and I was able to take that off. Here I am just kind of fiddling with it to get it out of place, and I was able to keep the chain and sprockets all kind of like together. Yeah, and then the spring comes out. I'm just, at this point, I'm like, oh, okay, there's a lot of tiny pieces. Your Torrington bearings, 2 of them. There's one here, and then one underneath of that plate that I'll take off next to the oil pump. With that first Torrington bearing removed, there's 6 bolts on the thrust plate. And from there, we start to disassemble the things that are connected to the E-shaft or the eccentric shaft that I guess would essentially be like a crankshaft. Yeah, so again, this is my first time. I'm learning all the names of the parts individually. Like I hear these parts and I feel like I'm so familiar with them, but then when you go to actually do this in person for the first time, you're like, oh, this is what that is. Oh, this is what that feels like. Oh man, this is clean. This is dirt. Like you really figure out what things are and what they look like. So I was able to get those things off nice and easy. Absolutely nothing broke. Again, I'm knocking on wood. And then I do the oil pump next. Again, just everything in great condition. I was in awe of like the color. I actually texted one of my friends and I was like, look at this chain, this like brass chain on the timing chain and all these like bolts with the oil on it. I'm like, whatever color you would call this, I want my wheels. My shop dog made a little cameo. She's like, what the f are you dripping everywhere? Yeah, so oil was just, I guess I didn't drain all the oil. I let it drain for a while, but there was oil everywhere. When I took off the oil pan, I had to put a bucket underneath of it and get everything dumped out. When you tilt the engine on its other side, all of the oils run to the other side. I had coolant coming out of the hose there on the right. Anyway, and there you have the flywheel nut. The 54 millimeter that I ordered from Amazon, had to make trips to Harbor Freight to get adapters for, just to spin it in 2 seconds. There was no fight from this flywheel nut. The flywheel itself was stuck. That took forever for me to run up the courage to actually smack it with my like small, I don't want to call it a sledgehammer, but like the, you know, iron mallet or whatever it was. Next up we have, we're upside down. We're looking at the rear of the engine. This is the part that held that flywheel, connects to the bell housing, taking off the seals. I was unfamiliar with this. I don't know what you would call it. This like key that locks in on the back end of, I guess, the E-shaft. I was unfamiliar with that. It took me a while fidgeting to figure out what was holding it in place, and that's what that was. So I did end up popping that back on. Now, if you're not familiar with this, there is a proper sequence for all of these bolts holding on this rear iron. There's, if I remember correctly, this was also 18 bolts, or maybe 17. But there's a proper order, and you're supposed to crack them loose before removing them individually. So you crack them loose in their sequence, and then you go back and remove them in sequence. And I guess that's just evenly distributing the removal of the weight, or like the loosening of the tension. So I was able to do that. I went through and printed out the sequence pattern on like a shipping label and just kind of held it up there so it was small. And then I went through and labeled them all with a Sharpie. One of them, the number 2 bolt, has an M on it, and it's the longest bolt in the sequence, and that's what you just saw me take out there. It's on the outer bottom left corner. But yeah, I mean, I find these like sequencing patterns, like the torque patterns, to be oddly zen and like relaxing, I guess you could say. Cracking things loose with a pry bar, you hear and hearing that like 18, 17 different times, or however many bolts there was, doing that many times and then going back and taking them out, I found to be very therapeutic. And it got a little repetitive, switching the camera angle and, you know, racking the focus. So I just sped that up to get all those off. And then finally, we're here, cracking this thing open. That was my first look at a rotor in person. And of course, immediately dropped a dowel. So these dowels, there's gonna be 2 on the rear housing, 2 on the front housing, holding things in. And there it is, that's the rear iron. And you can see the orange, I guess they're technically red, factory OEM Mazda coolant seal. The outer coolant seal stretched and like fell apart as I was coming out with it, and which is totally normal. I've seen that in almost every rotary video teardown on YouTube. They always just like stretch and tack apart. And yeah, so I wanted to get some good shots of what the rotor looked like untouched by me, Just taking that rear off, you can see the corner seals and the two-piece apex where like the little lip comes over. I take this out, things fall apart immediately. Like nothing was stuck. Like sometimes you see these rotary teardowns where like the apex seals, the corner seals are all stuck. Not the case here. Everything just kind of fell right out. I do know that compression on this engine was very good. I had a compression test done when I got the car about a year ago, and I only put about 3,000 miles on it, and it was very, very good. If I remember correctly, it was like 129 or 139 PSI. I think 129 PSI across the board. All of these seals were in amazing condition. The hard seals, I should say. The soft seals, obviously there's something wrong with the coolant on this car. Now, I fully expected going into this to either see a very obvious coolant seal failure. Here's some of the junk I got out of the water jacket, or a cracked iron on the water jacket where the seal sits, and I did not find a single crack. The irons look to be in amazing condition. The housing's amazing condition. There's no like deep grooves or cuts, so everything looked really good there, which was bittersweet almost, because I kind of was hoping that there'd be something obvious that's like, hey, that caused your issue. There wasn't. Some of those red OEM Mazda coolant seals did look, I guess, a little worn, you can say. There was one part that looked twisted. I think you can actually see it here, the top right. There was one part of the coolant seal that I think looked a little twisted, which would make sense. There was one part that was like caked in junk, like I guess built up carbon maybe, it's oil sludge perhaps, which I guess could cause an issue. I'm not sure. I feel like there's a lot of uncertainty that I was not expecting when I cracked this thing open. I was fully expecting there to be some answer, some obvious answer. So if you're watching this and you're more of a rotary expert than I am, or if you have similar experience, please comment if you see anything. I know that this is kind of tough. You're looking at just video footage, but if you see anything that jumps out at you like, hey, that might have caused some coolant issues, let me know in the comments. I'm here for it. If you see anything else that stands out to you that you're like, hey, take a look at that a little bit closer, let me know. I did a little bit of a teardown on the rotor. I started taking the side seals out of the rotors and sticking them back in to get the springs out. I was taking apex seals apart just to kind of inspect things, but I did not record that whole process. Anyway, that's the teardown. The next step is going to be cleaning, which I'll film some of, not all of, and rebuild.